Hello and welcome to Melomaniax, the podcast where we take unbiased deep dives into the biggest musicians and bands of all time. I'm Ashton.
And I'm Dallas. Before we get started today, please do us a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and most importantly, drop us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this. That's going to help us grow faster than anywhere else, so we really appreciate that. And if you really want to support the show and what we do here, consider joining our Patreon for just $5 a month. That's going to get you access to our private music discussion Discord, a shout out on an episode, and the power to pitch your own topic. All right. Let's get into it. Today we're talking about Paul Simon.
Yeah, Paul Simon, one of the greatest songwriters, musicians of all time, according to basically the music industry. He's been making music for, 60 years now? Dude is like, what is he, like? Yeah, he's in his 80s. So we went from Simon and Garfunkel days to Paul Simon solo career. And if you guys didn't check it out, we did do a Simon and Garfunkel episode before this, which is going to kind of cover like the first half of Paul Simon's career. So we're going to talk briefly about his childhood again, and then we're going to kind of
episode 55 for you guys wondering.
And then we're going to kind of skip over a good bit of like the Simon and Garfunkel, because we kind of discuss all of that in that show, the Simon and Garfunkel years. And then we're going to kind of, in this episode, we're going to hit the childhood briefly, and then we're going to basically just pick up right after Simon and Garfunkel broke up. So like what, 71, 70, or about around there in 1970s where we're going to kind of get into. So I'll hop back in the beginning. Excuse me. All right, let's start. Paul Simon, born, I think I went over this last time, but we'll go over born again. So October 13th, 1941, in Newark, New Jersey, to a Jewish family. His parents were Louis and Belle, and they both had musical roots. So his dad was a bass player for a dance band, and his mom was a teacher and singer. So music was definitely in his blood from the start. And it wasn't really like Paul's thing until he was about 10 years old. Like music wasn't. And then he started to finally feel the bug. His dad was playing on music, but then he really got into some music on the radio. And actually music wasn't always his first love. Baseball was. As a kid, he grew up loving baseball. He was, of course, being like in Newark, New Jersey and New York, he was a huge Yankees fan. Like he would listen to the radio every single Yankees game. And his mom said like when they would lose, he would be so upset that she just wouldn't make dinner because she knew he wouldn't eat. He wouldn't do anything, talk to anybody, come out of his room. It's almost how I feel with the Vikings. But like the Yankees were like his life. And he played and was a really good baseball player all the way up through high school until he got to college. But he was held back because he's like 5'3" or something like that. He's like really small for his size. So he wasn't big enough to play baseball in college. So that leads up to college where him and Garfunkel will reunite and do their thing over the next 10 to 15 years. And so Simon and Garfunkel, like we said, they go to college, reunite, write about 6 or 7 albums, become the biggest music duo of all time. And then at the height of their fame, they walk away. Paul Simon walks away and decides to start his solo career. So I did mention, do you remember when we were doing the Simon and Garfunkel episode, we did mention that Paul had a solo album come out during his time in England that we would talk about. So we're going to pick up. That. Yeah, we're going to pick up with that album.
Let's do it. Let's talk about that solo album. So Simon released while he was living in England, as Ashton just mentioned. And for anybody who didn't catch our Simon and Garfunkel episode, again, that's episode 55. We do dive into the years of the duo's career, and during those years, in the middle of it, Simon actually released his first solo album, but we skipped over that in that episode, and we mentioned we were going to talk about it in Paul's episode. So here we go. The Paul Simon Songbook was released sometime in August of 1965. The album only had one single that would also go on to become a single for Simon and Garfunkel, the duo, and that was the song I Am a Rock. And the album didn't really do anything on the charts or sales, but it is worth noting that it was released.
Yeah, so that was the album that they actually just went and scrapped. Like they just went and grabbed like 3 or 4 songs to put together that Simon and Garfunkel album. So it gets overshadowed because a lot of the songs just ended up being on a Simon and Garfunkel album in a way. But it did exist, and it is his first solo album. So it always makes the numbers, it makes it feel weird. When you're like going through and counting, you always forget about this first one. So a lot of times people count this next one as the first, but we still got to mention. So let's jump to 1971, following the breakup of Simon and Garfunkel. And after the split, Simon didn't immediately start writing more music. He actually spent a little bit of time teaching some songwriting courses at New York University, interestingly enough. And so he would listen to like student songs and give them feedback and criticism on them. And I always thought that was kind of interesting, like because he put it in a way like he said. Looking back, he said teaching wasn't for him, and he doesn't really feel like he was able to get any breakthrough. But he said personally, if he were to hear that like the Beatles were holding a course on songwriting, like I'd want to attend just to see what they had to say. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how he viewed it. But then he said teaching was not his thing. So, but I would have liked to still sit in the class just to see what he had to say personally.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, following his brief time as a teacher, Paul's first solo album, post Simon and Garfunkel, would be released the following year. It was self-titled. It was released on January 24th, 1972. The album managed to peak at number 4 on the Billboard 200 and also managed to barely get platinum certification. Those are 2 huge, huge things. The album had 3 singles to help promote it. The first single was Mother and Child Reunion, which hit number 4 on the Billboard 100. The second single was Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, which snagged number 22 on the Billboard 100. And the final single was Duncan, which hit 52 on the Billboard 100. And this album would definitely feel like a success for Simon, though following, Simon and Garfunkel, it's probably feeling like a step back because they were obviously so massive. But by any metrics, this album was a success either way.
Yeah, I definitely call it like, I mean, it's a scary thing to break away, especially if we remember Simon and Garfunkel's last album that they released was what, Double Diamond, like 25 million sales copies or something sold. So like anything you do to follow up is not going to feel like that. But I feel like, getting some like top 5 Billboard songs and, like hitting platinum, like not bad for your first album breaking away solo, like kind of like that, like confirmation, like, okay, I can be a solo artist. Like this will be okay. You know what I mean? So I feel like that was reassuring. Yeah. So Simon didn't waste much time before hopping back in the studio to work on his third solo album. There Goes Rhymin' Simon was released on May 22nd, 1973. The album fell just short of being a number 1 album, only hitting number 2 on the Billboard 200. This album would also be certified platinum, and it had a total of 6 singles released to help promote it. So many. The first single was Kodachrome, which fell just short of being a number 1, hitting number 2 on the Billboard 100. So this album is like just a bunch of almosts, right? The second single was Loves Me Like a Rock, which also hit number 2 on the Billboard 100. The third single was American Tune, which hit number 35 on the Billboard 100. The fourth single was Take Me to the Mardi Gras, which missed the charts. The fifth single was Something So Right, which also missed the charts. That hurts my heart because I love that song. I was going to say, that song's special to me because it's the first Paul Simon song I ever heard. I was watching the old Saturday Night Live episodes from the 70s, back when it was on, I think it was Peacock, right?
Yeah, it was on somewhere. I remember.
It was on
Hulu,
Peacock.
Maybe? It was all the episodes were somewhere.
They had the whole collection. Started like from the very start of the show, like in the 50s or whatever, the whole thing. And then they ended up taking it down and then sold the box collection. So you no longer can watch it for free. But like I was watching it while it was on there. And then Paul Simon was the host to the episode. And I was like, oh, I don't even know who that is. And so he was in a couple of the sketches, and then he performed Something So Right during his first musical break. And I was like, wow, I really, really, really love that song. So I looked up Paul Simon, looked up this album. This became my first favorite album of his. And this is kind of like really what introduced me to Paul Simon. So like this one feels like really special, even though it's no longer my favorite album. It's like holds a special place in my heart. And with all that said, I have to mention the sixth single, which was St. Jude's Comet, and that also did not chart. So just want to toss that in there.
Yeah, so 6 singles is a lot. So Simon continued to pump out albums with the release of Still Crazy After All These Years, which was released on October 17th, 1975. Finally, after all this, Simon's album would hit number 1 on the Billboard 200. But interestingly enough, this album didn't go platinum, just gold. So this album had 4 singles associated with it. The first was Gone at Last. That hit number 23. Second was My Little Town. That actually featured Art Garfunkel. That would hit number 9. The third single was 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, which was Simon's first number 1 song on the Billboard 100 since starting his solo career. And the fourth and final single was the title track, Still Crazy After All These Years, which hit number 40 on the Billboard 100.
Nice. Another success. So Simon took a small break from the studio after Still Crazy, but then he did a bunch of work for some films, doing some soundtracks and whatnot. After the Miss Robinson ordeal, I mean, dude's phone never stopped ringing for getting songs written for movies. So that was something he always got to do on the side. He was also personally cast in the Woody Allen film Annie Hall, so he got to act in that. And then he released his first compilation album called Greatest Hits, Etc., which would hit number 5 on the Billboard 200. So not bad.
Not bad at all. So after the 5-year hiatus of working on his own studio albums, Simon returns with his 5th album. Simon recently went from Columbia Records to Warner Brothers, so this was his first album under the new label. One Trick Pony was released on August 12th, 1980. The album landed at number 12 on the Billboard 200 and was only certified gold. And this album had 3 singles with it. The first single was Late in the Evening. That hit number 6. The other 2 singles were One Trick Pony, the title track, and Oh Marion, and neither were able to hit the charts. The album was actually paired with a film by the same name in which Simon wrote and starred in. So, I mean, it sounds like it seems like he's, I don't know, the way it's phrased, it sounds like we're saying he's not that successful. But if you look back, he's absolutely crushing it. Like every single album is charting like near the top or, the middle.
Yeah.
Singles are charting like crazy. Like he's can't miss, it seems.
Yeah, he's really hard on himself personally as well. Like he's extremely competitive. So like his albums doing well on like billboards and Grammys and sales like actually really matter to him from a competitive standpoint. Like he always wanted to be relevant with his music writing. Like that was his goal. And he stays relevant in the 60s, writing huge hits with Simon & Garfunkel, relevant through the 70s. And then now it's like, can he stay relevant in his 3rd straight decade of music? And we know personally how much music changes over time. So like, can he stay relevant for a 3rd decade in a row this year? So, and he's staying relevant every time he releases stuff. So he's still very successful, like you said. But anyways, following this album, we get a Simon and Garfunkel reunion for a live. It was a live show in Central Park called The Concert in Central Park, and that took place on September 19th, 1981. The show was taped and sold eventually as like a live, DVD or VHS probably back then. This performance sparked something in the two, and Simon and Garfunkel would actually take to the studio, but unfortunately, Simon ended up cutting all of Garfunkel's vocals like right before the release of the album and decided to just scrap that whole thing, which would further the tension between the two of them. They were always like an on and off again, like either hating each other or doing a tour together. Like they're so hot and cold.
Yep, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
So Hearts and Bones was released on November 4th, 1983. The album would only get to number 35 on the Billboard 200. That's still really good. I didn't see any sales associated with the album, no sales data, which makes sense because this album was a little bit more of a flop than the last one. He didn't even write a single for the album. So the album would eventually be viewed as one of his best works, but it would achieve the lowest sales of any album he would release. So I remember reading during these times that he was in a bit of a creative rut. So he had lost the confidence from the failure of his movie, which, I mean, come on, we knew that was going to fail, and the lack of production from his last album. So Simon was also constantly on again, off again with his girlfriend, Carrie Fisher. Wow. So he dated Carrie.
They also get married in a couple years.
Carrie time.
Yeah, no, that's when they, I can't remember what it was. She was in something that landed her the role of Star Wars, and then she was in Star Wars, and then he started seeing her at like parties, you know. And Carrie's parents are famous already, so
That's true. She
so
was a big cokehead, I think.
yeah, and so yeah, she wrote nothing but good things about Paul in her book. But the two were like a very one of the most unhealthy relationships, just on and off again. They got married, divorced after a year. All kinds of stuff happened between them.
Crazy.
But that movie,
When you go back and look, you hear people say like, "Oh, this lady was like the hottest lady," and you go back and look, and you're like, "Nah." And then it's just something with like the older times, like in the I don't know 40s, 50s, even older. Like it's just they're not the same standards
it's
as
like
today.
sex appeal changes.
Carrie Fisher was not like that. She was straight up hot as
yeah,
when she
right.
was
Oh yeah,
younger.
yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah, yeah. No,
But there's so many others like Marilyn Monroe. Everyone talks about like, oh my god. You go back and look, you're like, I don't know. Like,
yeah, yeah. That's a good point.
maybe for the 50s or whenever it was, 60s.
I do want to say that movie failed, but it wasn't like the biggest failure. It did have some other like art. It got like a 5 or a 6-star, like out of 10. Like, so it was just a very middling.
yeah.
But like he's used to
That's
like
pretty good. That's probably the best you could hope for.
That's the best you could hope for as a non-actor, right? Like,
Yeah.
But like I said, there were a couple like notable actors in the movie outside of him, so
nice.
that probably helped. So a couple years later, in 1985, Simon performed for USA for Africa, and was also a part of the We Are the World fundraiser. Simon had heard a bootleg tape of, oh gosh, I looked up the pronunciation, Mbakanga, I believe it is.
That sounds right.
Or South African street music. And Simon took to South Africa to record with some African musicians. So he happened to already be in Africa when the We Are the World charity was happening. So it was like, that was an easy, yeah. It's like, oh, I'm already here. Anyways, Simon did a bunch of recording in Africa with quite a few different South African musicians and bands, specifically Ladysmith Black Mambazo. And then all these recordings would be put into Simon's greatest work as a solo artist, his magnum opus, his 7th studio album, Graceland.
So Graceland was released on August 25th, 1986. Despite hitting number 1 on so many charts worldwide, Graceland only was able to reach number 3 on the Billboard 200. I would be interested to see what number 1 and 2 were.
Me too.
That year.
What year was 86? I'll look it up.
August 25th, 1986. You look that up real quick. Okay, so however, the album more than made up for that in sales. So it went 5 times platinum in the US, sold over 16 million copies worldwide, giving him his first solo career diamond album. Simon wrote 5 singles for the album. The first was You Can Call Me Al, which landed at number 23 on the Billboard 100. Second single was the title track Graceland, that hit number 81. Third single was The Boy in the Bubble, which snagged the 86th spot on the Billboard 100. Single number 4 was Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes, which didn't land on any U.S. charts. And finally, the 5th single was Under African Skies, which also didn't chart. So this album actually did go on to win Album of the Year at the 1987 Grammys.
So I just looked it up. We had a Madonna album, and the soundtrack for Top Gun were the two that were ahead of him.
Interesting.
Right? The soundtrack for Top Gun was number 1 for like 6 or 7 weeks during that year. So big one. All right. So real quick.
Is You Can Call Me Al the one that goes do 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 do?
Yep.
Do,
Yeah.
do, do, do. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's got that really, really interesting bass fill in it that they reversed. Is that one?
Yep. That's that one.
Yeah. That's a
where
fun
they
one.
reversed the bass fill. So so some controversy followed the release of Graceland. When Simon traveled to South Africa to record, he was actually criticized for some by breaking the cultural boycott imposed on the country due to the apartheid. Is that how you say that?
Apartheid.
Apartheid? Oh, okay. Why even put the H then?
Yeah,
anyways,
we were a little young for that, but that was
Apartheid.
a big thing.
Back then, yeah.
No, not sorry. We weren't a little young for it. We weren't alive yet.
Yeah, I was gonna say this was happening.
And I think
right
by the
before
time we
then.
were alive, and especially by the time we had awareness, this was kind of like in the past. Like no one was talking about it anymore. But at the time, it would have been a big deal. Like think like right now, like Israel, Gaza, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it was a big thing, and it was a bit of like a political firestorm, basically. But Simon defended his actions by arguing that music transcends politics, and his intentions was to highlight the beauty of South African music. And he also paid the musicians he worked with and split the royalties with them. So it wasn't like he just basically they were thinking that he was exploiting like taking South African music sound and then like going and making money off of it somewhere else.
Splitting the royalties is crazy.
I mean, it's they were musicians on his things, but also you have to remember Paul Simon gets almost all the royalties from his music. Like he owns all his music. He did from the very beginning. So like, I guess if anybody could share a little bit of royalties, it would be him.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what he shared. But yeah, it's very rare that you would share royalties with someone just for like playing keyboards on your. But you know what I mean? Like
yeah, but you probably did it just for the songs themselves, not the whole album, right? I don't know how royalties work, but
it would be so the way royalties works. There's two types of royalties attached to any one song. So you have the songwriter royalties, which is like it's a little hard to explain because so often the two versions of royalties are the same. But you have two. You have the sound recording, which is what appears on the album, and that's actually different than the songwriting royalties. So where the only way you could figure out where that comes into play is if you do a cover song. So like we're doing a cover of Thunderstruck coming out soon. And so we obviously don't own the songwriting royalties, but we do own the sound recording royalties because we created the sound recording ourselves. So that's an interesting thing. So we basically
you own your version of that song.
Yeah, another version would be Guns N' Roses did "Knocking on Heaven's Door" or any cover song. So they own that sound recording. That is the only one you'll ever hear. You'll never hear Bob Dylan's version, But Bob Dylan's still making money on that.
So they pay the songwriter the writing royalties, but they get all of the recording royalties.
Recording royalties, yeah.
Okay.
It could be set up differently sometimes, but that's the gist.
That's a good generic. Yeah, so that's a good generic explanation.
There's 200% royalties in each song, and then if you zoom out from there, you have the publisher as well as the writer. So that kind of goes into two different areas as well.
And that percentage
gets pretty complicated.
Gets broken up all kinds of ways.
Generally, what you would see with someone like Paul Simon, and I'm not speaking for him, but generally what would happen is he'd go into a studio and he'd say, "We need the best South African keyboard player. We'll pay him. We'll do a work for hire agreement, meaning you don't own anything you do. You're agreeing to accept this payment, $500, $10,000, whatever he wants to pay him, and you'll come in and record on the song, and you will not have any royalties. That's what a work for hire agreement is.
I see.
A lot you'll see work for hire agreements when someone designs a logo, like the person who designs the logo for Apple created that logo. But Apple damn sure doesn't want them to own that logo.
Yeah.
So they're going to do a work for hire agreement. Same thing with music. Like if I want a fiddle player to come in, like I want a good fiddle player. I do not want him to own my music. He had nothing to do with it. He just came in and laid down fiddle.
Yeah.
That's not that hard. Now the difference is if he comes in and he's there for months and he's writing progressions and helping and
that's what happened is those guys wrote some of the music for his album. Like, you know what I mean? Like they wrote the music together, like sat down, like some of those guys wrote some of the riffs and things like that. So it wasn't just like they came in and played something Paul wrote. They wrote some stuff that ended up being original stuff they wrote on the album. So that's where I think the royalties come into play is like, well, you actually were part of the songwriting process.
Yeah. It gets tricky if you get like someone like Ozzy who doesn't play a note on anything, but then sometimes refuse to give royalties to like Randy Rhoads or Jakey Lee, who like basically wrote entire songs, like famous guitar riffs,
Yeah. So, anyways,
like, that's a little weird.
This whole controversy basically actually just ended up bringing more light to the struggles that were going on, like you brought up. So this whole thing with Paul Simon kind of just brought more attention to it, and it would be a big thing over the next 5 years.
Yeah, people don't understand that they're bitching about stuff like that. They're just making it worse or better.
Yeah.
Whichever one's against what they want.
Right.
So feeling extra international, Simon headed to Brazil to seek inspiration for his following album. Simon took about 5 different trips to Brazil over the span of 88 to 89, and he was falling in love with the sounds of the street musicians. So, The Rhythm of the Saints was released on October 16th, 1990. This album peaked at number 4 on the Billboard 200 and achieved double platinum in the U.S., sold over a little over 3 million copies worldwide. 3 singles were released in support of the album. First was The Obvious Child, which hit number 92, and the second and third singles were Proof and Born at the Right Time, which both didn't hit any major charts.
Yeah, this album's really good.
There's something I kind of want to clarify too. In
Yep.
here, it says a few times we've said he wrote a single or he didn't write a single. That's not really how it works.
Yeah, it's
You write the album, and then when it's done, a lot of times the label, a lot of times artists doesn't have anything to do with it. They just choose which songs they think will do best. Someone in Paul's case probably has a lot more of a say than other places.
Yeah, I was gonna say in through the book, it was that the label came to him like, all right, we don't have a single for the album. I need you to write a single for the album type thing. But he got to a point where he said, I don't want to write singles for the radio anymore. And they said, okay. And so he stopped writing. Like he didn't want singles. And you'll see it. It's like a common theme going forward with some of his albums. He stops writing. He doesn't do any singles. And that's like, he does have a lot of power over his. You have to remember, because of his record deal, he has way more power than most musicians to begin with as far as ownership. But then he also is kind of like, he's in that Bob Dylan status. Like he tells the label what to do instead of the label telling him, because he's so big at like only a few people can, I feel like, achieve that level of like, and it's not all 100% true. You're right. Like the label probably was pissed like, bro, we need singles because that's all we care about.
Well, I think there's some confusion around quote singles. Like people seem to think they're like specifically written singles. It's not usually how it works. Sometimes, most of the time, you just have the album, or you have more songs than you need for the album, and then you'll choose. Okay, song 4, 6, and 10 will be our singles. Let's go. You didn't write them to be a single.
Yeah, you just wrote them.
Those are the most. You just wrote the album, and then they chose. Now, sometimes, like you said, they might look at the whole album, see the 10 songs, and be like, "Shit,
there's not a
none of this is going to work." Yeah. Could you go back and write one we could use for? They might say something like that, but you don't sit down to like write. I think that's a big misconception. Like people put so much emphasis on like, what was the single? It's like, well, it was just a song on the album they thought would do good. Like, and then the other thing is, it may or may not have done good. We will never know, because when they chose it, they decided to put billions of dollars in marketing budget behind it. So basically, you're saying like, this is the song we want to spend money on. And then when you spend the money, of course, it's going to go massive. Like when you have big label budgets in the 60s, 70s, 80s, like, yeah, you're spending millions of dollars to put this out, to put this song everywhere. So you could have easily chosen the next song on the album and done that. And that would have probably been the one we're talking about now, Yeah. It's just so hard to prove that. But we tend to think like, oh, Sweet Child of Mine was the best one, or because it was the biggest one. But that was just the one they chose to put all the money behind. Like it could have easily been a different one.
I gotcha. Yeah, well, I mean, then I guess it's weird the way the book is. You'd have to read the book, I guess, but the way it lays it out is he kind of is like, I'm not writing singles anymore. Like literally.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, that's what a lot of artists would say probably, just meaning they're not going to write.
I'm not writing for the radio, I'm writing for me.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's. So basically, I guess that's a good way to put it, is he stops like, I'm not going to just like specifically go for charting radio stuff.
Yeah.
So they stopped releasing singles.
Ironically, it worked for him. But not Paul Simon, because he truly has that artist spirit. But it's so funny to me when other artists say that, and then the thing they put out next is just like the most like radio
thing you've ever heard. Yeah.
Wow, what a stand you took.
We were really against the radio until our bank accounts got really low, and then we.
I don't write for the radio. I do have a boat, so
yeah, I do.
I need to write for the
I write
radio.
for the boat. I write for the boat.
I don't write for the radio.
I
write for my Beverly Hills
boat,
wife.
The Maserati, the house in LA. I write for all that. I don't write.
My wife won't stop buying Gucci. Yeah. So I have to write for the wife.
Right. Jeez. Anyways, that was a really good album. That one also has like a very, like international sound, but like the South American vibe's even cool. It's got like a lot of drum focus again, shakers and stuff. So it has a very similar like kind of flow as Graceland, but it's different. Definitely very different.
Got to be nerve-wracking to follow
but
up.
It's great.
Yeah,
I'm sure it was. But it was really, really good.
Yeah.
So Paul followed the success of this album by hosting another huge concert in New York. And of course, he held it in Central Park. And he actually included some of the African and South American bands that he worked with on the previous two albums. And that show had over 750,000 people in attendance, which at that time was the largest show in Central Park, I think up to that point. And then the show led to a live album and a TV special that would end up winning an Emmy. And then Simon then took to the Born at the Right Time tour right after this.
In 1990, Simon and Garfunkel were inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So they would have another reunion a few years later in 93 for the release of Paul Simon 1964/1993, which was a 2-disc compilation album that included Simon's best works from Simon and Garfunkel and his solo career. So they would reunite for that.
Yep. And then Simon would be inducted personally, like for his solo career in 2001, I believe. So a good bit later. And he'd be inducted with Steely Dan and Aerosmith and Queen, I think, or Steely Dan, Aerosmith. It was a couple. You know, they always do them in like groups. Anyways, Simon started working on a musical in his off time called The Cape Man. It ended up becoming his main project over a couple of years, and it eventually opened on January 29, 1998. He had spent quite a few years of his creativeness on it, and he also spent quite a bit of his own money on it, so a lot of out of pocket. And the play would ultimately be a huge flop. It would receive terrible reviews, poor box office sales, like this kind of. And then it also had an album that accompanied it with like the soundtrack called "Songs from the Cape Man." That did poor. Just the whole project was a failure, unfortunately for him. So musical's not his thing.
I hate to say it, but there is some sort of like bad part of human nature where we kind of like to see the people on top fail, you know?
Yeah.
But it is nice. It is nice. I don't know how to say it's nice, but I don't know. It's I guess for him it was probably humbling. Like I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he was thinking like, you know, oh, everything I touch turns to gold. Let's do this. And it didn't work. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
Like, that's kind of nice to know. Like it's we talk about Taylor Swift a lot. It's like
Stay in your
anything
lane.
she releases,
Yeah.
you know, is gonna instantly become the number one song on Apple Music, Spotify, everything for like weeks and weeks and weeks, just because she released it, and it's regardless of quality. So I think it's nice that we have a little bit of society that'll humble you if you put out something that's not up to snuff, you know?
Yeah. So even it failed, but a lot of the people that worked with him on it, you know, they kind of felt bad, but he at least made sure everybody was like paid out. He actually paid out the lost money that the label or the production company lost. He paid every bit of money that they lost on the project.
Yeah.
Back. So he actually paid out of the debt for it.
Was probably a freaking trillionaire. So,
well, he's got a lot of money, and he didn't even have to. It was just out of his own like. He just felt so bad that he paid all of the losses.
That's awesome.
And everything. So
that's cool. It is it is funny. I'll do a quick sidebar. This made me laugh when it kind of relates to this, but so Duff was coming to town to play a gig, and I was the guitarist for that show. And Bruce had texted me, Duff's brother, and said, yeah, Duff's flying in on his own dime. Like he made this big deal.
Oh,
like,
oh my.
I don't know how much a plane ticket could cost, but I Googled Duff's net worth, $40 million. So I was like, that's not impressive.
He bought his plane ticket. I just want to
don't say this is impressive.
Hold on. I really don't want to. I don't want to brag too much about myself, but I buy my own plane tickets as well. I just wanted to put that out there.
Now, guys, the project flopped, but out of the goodness of my heart, I'm gonna pay you this tax write-off.
Right.
It'll be 0.000. Honestly, I won't even notice I paid it. Right. All right. Cool. Thanks. So facing the biggest failure in his career, Simon knew he needed something to jumpstart him again. So he ended up going on a 3-month national tour with Bob Dylan. They co-headlined, so alternated headlining each night, and performed on each other's biggest hits. That would have been cool to see. Simon continued to write new music and put out his 10th album, You're the One. That was released October 3rd, 2000. This would hit number 19 on the Billboard 200 and would achieve gold certification. No singles were written for this album. The album did get some Grammy nominations. Correct. But didn't win any of those Grammys. Simon took to touring for a while to promote the release of this album. He's still pumping out albums. I mean, all these years later, we're at the turn of the millennium now, and he's still charting, like number 19. Like, that's insane.
Yeah. At this point, there's also a little...
Even when he misses, he can't... His miss is like any other artist's dream.
Right. Yeah, he's definitely up there. So then following the tragic events of 9/11, Simon performed Bridge Over Troubled Water on America, a tribute to heroes, which was a nationally broadcast thing to benefit September 11th telethon fund. Goodness. And then he performed The Boxer to start the first aired episode of Saturday Night Live following the events of 9/11. I think it took place September like 26th or something. So it was like 2 weeks or so after that they decided to run it. And it's like it's a pretty famous episode. The mayor of New York is on stage with a bunch of firemen, firefighters and stuff. And he introduces Paul Simon and just tells basically the country, he has like a little speech, and then it goes right into Paul Simon doing The Boxer on the other stage, being a huge New York guy. So really emotional performance. One of the ones he's famous for, actually. Just that little Saturday Night Live
that would have been a somber episode. Mm-hmm. So the following year, in 2002, Simon wrote the song "Father and Daughter" for Nickelodeon's The Wild Thornberrys movie. I think I saw that movie. I don't remember the song, though. The track actually features Simon's son doing backup vocals, and this was probably the first Paul Simon song you ever heard. You said, right?
Yep. This was
the
first.
Didn't know it was Paul Simon.
Nope, because I knew that because I knew this. I watched this movie a lot, and it was my favorite song from the movie. I was always like, I love that song. Like, so I of course like randomly, only like within the past 2 years or so, found out that song was Paul Simon, and was like, oh my gosh,
oh wow,
I didn't even know that. Yeah.
I'm almost certain I saw the movie, but I do not remember it.
If I were to play the song, I bet it would jog your memory a little bit of at least like some familiarity. Maybe.
I don't think I saw it that much though. That's the thing. So
yeah,
it might not jog it.
Yeah, that's true.
But so like this was Nickelodeon. There was 3 really: Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and Disney Channel. My family was a Disney Channel family, so I can tell you all about Disney Channel.
So were we, but we owned this movie on VHS for some reason. So
oh wow. I'll have to go back and watch it. Wonder if it holds up.
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
It almost certainly does not.
Yeah.
Is it Flea that's the crazy kid in Wild Thornberrys?
Yeah,
Is that show?
Yep. Yeah. That's that movie. Yeah, wow. So Flea's in it.
They knew what they were doing.
There you go.
Well, he was the voice of the crazy kid that just goes like, rah, 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 rah.
Yeah, Donnie.
And yeah. So that's throughout the whole show, I think, though.
Yeah, the show, the movie.
Not just the movie, yeah.
Yeah. How many different lines do they have to get? He just does the same
I wonder
screaming.
if he
just did a couple different ones. Yeah.
And made a shit ton of I mean, when you get celebrities like that, you don't have them coming in multiple times. Like you get them for one day. So like
that's what I'm saying.
They're
it's
gonna
like
come in and make a shit ton of crazy noises, and then they'll figure it out later.
Yeah, if he did just like one recording session of a bunch of different that's all the voice lines they need for the whole show, because it never changes.
And then they may have had him come back in, maybe once a season or once a different time for the movie. I don't know how it works, but for sure he's not showing up to work every day like the other voice actors.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so after another year, Simon and Garfunkel would reunite again. They performed together when they received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. So they performed at that award ceremony, and then they followed this performance with a reunion tour called Old Friends. And then they followed that tour with another international tour that was called like Encore, so like an extended tour, basically.
So between Carrie Fisher and Art Garfunkel, I'm beginning to suspect Paul Simon's a bit of a problem. I don't know why I'm on and off again with everyone else in my life. They're all assholes. It's like, wait a second.
Hold on. It's
what's the common denominator?
I mean, he's the common denominator, but Carrie Fisher was wild. Like,
yeah, no, she's
bro,
for sure.
Wild, like partying, drugs, alcohol, all the fucking time. Like that is not reliable. And then Art was just
not so into music, it seems.
Well, Art doesn't write anything. He just performs, and
that should be the easiest guy to get along with. Then.
So I know, but because
the stuff you would argue about would be the creative process. Like, if you're just coming in and singing what I wrote, like that's easy. As long if you don't care about that, that's the easiest relationship ever. The friction I could see was when Art, and I'm not saying this happened, but if Art was like raising his hand, like I have an idea, and Paul's like sit the fuck down, like that
happened. They had a lot of idea clashing. A lot of clashing like that kind of stuff. They got into lots of arguments as far as creative stuff. And then also like there were little things like where Garfunkel would go and sing some of the solo songs Simon wrote for him. And then like would come up, bring the like piano player up on stage to like bow and stuff instead of Simon, who wrote the song, stuff like that. Yeah, like Garfunkel just kind of always was like, I don't know, man. They have the weirdest, like, there's plenty of times where Simon is a douche and plenty of times where Garfunkel's a douche. And I just can't like pick a side between the two. I just am like, I don't know.
That's probably how it is with most relationships, you know? It's like nobody's all good or all bad.
Yeah, there's no picking a side. They're both kind of douches to each other at different points in time. And then, but so yeah, I can see Paul Simon definitely has a little bit of a Napoleon complex. Like we can definitely
New York.
No, but he's actually like 5'2", 3. You know, Art. Everybody always like thought Art wrote the songs because Garfunkel's taller, more handsome. You know, literally people would go to him and think he was like the head guy of the band just because he was tall. And like Simon never liked that. You know, like I'm the dude who does everything. Like.
Yeah, that would get under my skin for sure.
Yeah, so like that's kind of like that kind of thing was building, and like there's just all kinds of stuff, but we'll move past that. This is Paul Simon's episode.
It's a deep thing. So
yeah,
anyway,
sure.
So Paul began working on another album following all this touring he was doing. So his 11th album, Surprise, was not a surprise. It was released May 10th, 2006. The album hit number 14 on the Billboard 200, and the album did not have any major sales associated that we should talk about here. Simon also didn't write any singles for this album, or none were selected, as we said. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to that, but Simon, as we mentioned earlier,
they stopped writing them.
He stops writing the kind of the commercial, writing specifically for radio. He kind of moves away from that, which I think actually looking back on this, it seems like he kind of moved away from that a while ago.
Yeah, he did.
But he continues to stay away from it.
He was already kind of sick of it at the end of Simon and Garfunkel with how the label were like, with how they treated him with, The Sound of Silence. Like, oh my God, dude, like destroy the radio again, please. Like, and he was just like, I guess an artist knows when you write a song that is like, oh, this could be like, it seems like from most of the research, when people write that like hit that's going to be good on the radio, like they know before it goes a lot of times that like, oh yeah, this is our good one. So I wonder.
Okay. There's no way to prove this, but you gotta think that that's some of the. There's got to be a word for it, but it's that psychological thing where when something happens, we all in retrospect look back, and go like, "I called that." It's like you definitely didn't call that. Like, I was there. You didn't say a word about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but humans have that. Humans love that. Actually, it's funny. This is a timely example to what we're talking about, but I was just talking to my wife yesterday. She was asking about the old singer for my band. And I told her, it was funny to me how when we moved on from him and we parted ways, everyone in my band suddenly knew that he was never the guy to begin with, and they knew it all along. And I was like, well, why nobody ever said anything to me? Like,
yeah.
Now you know? Like, of course. Like,
yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's easy in retrospect to be like, I knew this was the song. It's like, you knew it was the song because we put, like I said, $1 billion marketing dollars behind it. Now it's everywhere. Now it's easy to be like, go back and say, oh, yeah, I knew this was the song. Or if you're, not even talking about Paul Simon, just anyone. But that kind of stuff's always fascinating to me. Like a good example is Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. That album was released in 1987 and did nothing, zero, for a full year. And you could still find people that were like, I was blasting that album in 87, dude. It's like, I promise you weren't.
Yes.
I promise you, I have it on very good authority, you weren't.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's one of those things, and it's one of those things that you can never prove. You can never get to the bottom of. Because maybe they did have a feeling. Maybe they didn't. Maybe it's colored by, It's one of those things where like human eyewitness testimony is the weakest testimony. Did you know that?
Yeah, it for sure is.
And it's not even that they're lying or have ill intentions. It's just humans are unreliable. Our memories are unreliable. Yep. We ourselves think we remember stuff. And we're not lying to ourselves. We just honestly think we remember, and we remember wrong. Like I have distinct memories of like listening to a song in a certain year, and then I go look it up, and the song wasn't even out in that year. Like it came out 2 years later. Like stuff like that. And it's like, okay, well, I'm wrong. Like my brain's wrong.
Yeah, this always causes so many. How many arguments has this brought up where two people remember the same event completely different ways? You know what I mean? They were both there, both witnessed it, both recalled things happening, and then both come up with completely different stories. That happens all the time, and there's so many arguments that result because of it. Like you have to think like you're viewing everything from your perspective as you. in your world. You know what I mean? Like it's always going to be different than everyone else. But
there's also like chemistry in your own brain.
yeah, I was gonna say we add
maybe
in
you're
details.
Drunk,
and,
maybe you're high, maybe you're sad, maybe you're on medication, whatever. There's so many things that could affect it. Police will tell you this all the time that if an eyewitness says the guy was wearing a yellow jacket and they find the guy and they find the footage and he was not wearing a yellow jacket, stuff like that. It's like, how did you get that wrong? Like, there's just stuff going on that is just we're not reliable sources most of the time.
All right. Well,
anyway, I think that's a fascinating thing. But getting back to it,
I agree with you. So, following this album, Simon had another reunion with Garfunkel. Like I said, this resulted with a tour. They also played at the 25th anniversary Rock and Roll Hall of Fame concert. And then after this, Simon began work on his next album, "So Beautiful or So What," was released on April 8th, 2011. The album peaked at number 4 on the Billboard 200, and Simon recalled that this was his best studio work he'd done in 20 years. And they even released 2 singles for this album. The first was "Getting Ready for Christmas Day," which actually was released as like a single, like without plans of putting it on an album, and then they ended up putting it on this album. So that was like a single before this album released. And then they also, the other single was "The Afterlife," which hit some smaller charts. But
there we go. So Simon followed the album with a world tour that would hit the U.S., the U.K., the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Germany. He then rounded it out by performing at the National September 11th Memorial Museum for the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. In 2012, Simon released a 25th anniversary box set for Graceland, and he played a few shows in Europe in support of that box set.
Then a couple years after that, Simon embarked on a national 21-date tour with Sting, the singer from The Police, for those who aren't familiar. And Simon recalls after one of the shows, Sting asking if he was better than Garfunkel, and then called them Simon and Sting Funkle for a few shows after that, jokingly. And then fun fact for you, Dallas, because I know you're a fan, Simon wrote and performed the theme song for Louis C.K.'s show Horace and Pete. I've never seen it, but
yeah,
I know you're a fan of Louis C.K.'s stand-up at least. But yeah, that intro song is Paul Simon playing guitar and singing.
I think I remember seeing that when that show came out. That show's interesting because Louis C.K.'s business model has been, even before he got canceled and came back, he had started bringing all of his stuff. What's the word? Like self-publishing. Like like you can watch Horace and Pete if you go to louisck.com and buy it for like $5. Like it's not on streaming. It never was, and that kind of stuff. And it's like you just pay $5 or whatever it was, and you get the whole show. It's pretty cool. Okay. And he's done that with all of his stuff. Like I think with very few exception, you can just go to his website and buy a la carte, like whatever you want to watch that he's done. And he'll deliver it to you, and then you own it forever, and you can watch. It's pretty interesting, and obviously it's working. It's really good for the fans, and it's really good for him.
Yeah, that's a lot of more money.
He's going to be making way more money doing that than he is in Netflix. Now that only works if you have a big audience, but he does. So.
And also, nobody telling you what to do when you're independent.
Oh yeah, that's got to be the dream when you're at a big level.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, not to get down the rabbit hole with Louis C.K., who I do love. Simon put together his 13th solo album in 2016, Stranger to Stranger. That's the year we moved up here, I think, or the year before. Stranger to Stranger was released June 3rd, 2016. The album would peak at number 3 on the Billboard 200. That's huge. The album had 3 singles, and the first was Wristband, the second was Cool Papa Bell, and the third was The Werewolf, and none of those hit the charts specifically. The song from Louis C.K.'s show is on this album as well, if you want to check that out. So Simon flirted with the idea of retiring from touring following this album, and he did do a farewell tour that would end in 2018. I'd retire too, dude. Touring's like the hardest part.
Yeah, and you got to think, like, dude is in his 80s now. Like, I think he's allowed the break.
All the things you need. Now, when you're at a big level, it's easier for sure. But all the things you need to survive as a human, you need, good food, good sleep. All these things, they go out the window when you're on tour. Like, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, so Simon didn't waste much time before getting back in the studio to work on his next album. In the Blue Light was released on September 7th, 2018. The album would only reach number 70 on the Billboard 200, and this album has no sales numbers or singles. It's kind of one of his more forgotten albums. It still got favorable reviews. And then, of course, he did not follow with a tour because, like I said, he's done touring, but he did say that he's not ruling out live performances. So I'm sure he'll still show up to like an event at some point, like
As long
some
as
kind
it's
of.
not far from his house and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's like he can show up and do a show, but he's not going to tour. There's a difference between doing like a show for Saturday Night Live and like going on tour.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
Yeah,
he'll still
taking a
do
cab
live.
back home to your house. Yeah.
Yeah, so live performances are on the table, tours off the table.
That's awesome. I love that. So Simon's 15th and most recent album, Seven Psalms, was released May 19th, 2023. I remember this coming out when we were doing the show. The album concept came to Simon in a dream, actually. He woke up and wrote down lyrics and song ideas and just went with it. The album would only hit 153 on the Billboard 200. It also didn't have any singles associated. It did get good reviews, and that catches us up to today. So we're going to move into our ratings for Paul Simon. As you guys know, if you've been here with us before, we rate each artist. We come up with a total out of 5. The way we get that total is we break it down into 6 categories, each of those out of 5, and then we average them. Those categories are creativity, evolution, replayability, cultural impact, emotional connection, and nostalgia factor. These categories are in different places on the scale of like objectivity. Like some of it is strictly our opinion. Some of it's a little more objective, like cultural impact. But we're going to go ahead and get into it now. Ashley, get us started with creativity. So creativity, the way we defined it over time was how creative they are compared to their peers, right? So in their space, how creative are they?
Yep, and I'm going to lead us off actually with a 5 out of 5 for creativity on Paul Simon.
I was going to match you with that. I think, and the reason, because as I was saying, among their peers, my next thought was there aren't any peers.
Yeah, he doesn't have peers because of how unique his music is.
Yeah, there's nothing you could. He's his own thing. He created his own space, and somehow, this is impossible to do. Somehow managed to achieve maximum success within that space he created.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned
only the
it.
biggest and best artists have done that.
I think I mentioned this to you. I can't remember if we mentioned it in the show, but when he was young and listening to music, he heard Elvis was blowing up and he loved Elvis. But the thing was, he was like, I have to change what I'm doing musically because I can never compete with an Elvis. My voice isn't as powerful, strong. I don't look that handsome. Like I'm not as TV, so he was like, I got to change spaces because I can't be the best in that space. I could never be better than Elvis in that space. So I'm going to find my own space that I can be the best at. And that's what he did.
The good news is looks help. Especially these days, but they also won't hold you back.
They aren't everything. But at that time, Elvis was like 21 all over TV. The
just think
about
whole that
country
was
just
Because Mick Jagger was an ugly motherfucker.
Oh yeah, but he could sing.
That brings us to evolution. So how creative was Paul Simon on his own timeline?
Dude, I'm once again like either at a 4 or 5 for evolution.
I think this one has to go with a 4 or 5. Yeah, I'm going to give it another 5.
Yeah, that's why I was at 5 to begin, because just
always pushing boundaries, never settling, going different places, traveling, experiencing cultures, incorporating those cultures into music. He did it all. He went above and beyond what any other artist would reasonably do. So, that's a 5 out of 5 for me. Replayability. This is obviously actually extremely personal.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is where I think we'll finally get some differences. I'm at a 4 out of 5 for replayability. He's not a perfect 5 out of 5 because his songs are quirky. They're interesting. I like them. I also understand anybody who doesn't like his songs because they are, like we said previously, he'd kind of created like his own unique genre space. Like, so Paul Simon doesn't really sound like anything else. It's Paul Simon. So you either kind of like it or you don't. And that replayability kind of comes down to like, how much do you really truly like the Paul Simon songs? And I like them a pretty good bit. So
yeah, replayability for me is at a 2. I like the songs, but it's not something I'm going to listen to on a daily basis or weekly, even yearly basis. So then that brings us to cultural impact. Here, I think it's again somewhat objective. Dude, I'm going to give him a 4 here because he's just. You talk about the Saturday Night Live performances, all of the worldwide stuff he's done. He was just massive. Plus, you consider Simon and Garfunkel with songs like, "Why Am I Blank?" "Sound of Silence," and just like there's a few songs we've talked about on the show where they're covered too much. The best example is "Hallelujah" by Leonard Cohen. Every girl with an iPhone singing that in a bathroom with nice reverb, with their eyes closed, like all getting into. It's kind of like we get it. The "Sound of Silence" is one of those songs. It's also covered too much.
God,
So cultural impact for me, I'm putting it at 4.
I'm so between a 5 and a 4. It's crazy. I'll go 4. Well, I'll go 5. If Taylor Swift was a 6, I think Paul Simon's a 5. So yeah, I'll go with cultural impact as a 5 for most of the same reasons. I just think he had a very, very. I think if you include the Simon and Garfunkel into that cultural impact, it's a 5 out of 5. So
that's fair. Yeah. Emotional connection. How much do we personally connect to the music?
I'm at a 3 out of 5 for the emotional connection. There's some decent ones that I have some emotional, but nothing too strong. But 3 out of 5 is kind of a high emotional connection for me. So
yeah, and I'm at a 2 out of 5. It's not that I don't overly it's just kind of middle of the road for me. It really would be kind of a 2.5. And that brings us to nostalgia factor. This one is basically based on obviously our past and what we remember hearing as kids, and like you have the Wild Thornberrys connection, things like that. For Paul, I don't have any of those connections. I have no connections to him whatsoever. So it's coming in at a 1 for me.
And then
that's
it's
obviously
4,
not a reflection on him. But
yeah, 4 out of 5 for me on the nostalgia. Obviously, I have a lot of different memories associated with Paul Simon. So, ooh, this one looks like it might be one of my highest scores. Maybe.
Looks like it might be. Ashton coming in at a 4.3.
Woo!
I'm coming in a full point lower at a 3.2. That's rare. We're usually pretty close.
Yep. Yeah, that's that experience.
It was all the subjectivity on this one. We agreed on the objective ones.
Yeah, right. And then the subjectivity is just
just different. Nice, cool. Well, that wraps up Paul Simon. Thank you guys for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you. That was fun. I really enjoyed this one. Really excited for the next one. I'm not going to spoil it to you guys, but there's going to be a lot of banter a lot of talking between Dallas and I on this one. That might be a longer episode than some of our recent ones have been. But I'm excited. It's gonna be a great topic. It's a big one. It's a big one, guys. So
should be fun.
Yep. But we'll catch you guys next time.
All right. We'll see you next week.